Agent Marcus Reynolds had seen it all in his 15 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. From high-stakes drug busts in Miami to counterterrorism operations in New York, he thought he understood the meaning of pressure. But, nothing had prepared him for the assignment that landed on his desk on a gray Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C. The manila folder was thin, marked with the highest security classification. Inside was a single sheet of paper outlining what appeared to be routine diplomatic protection duty. The President of the United States would be visiting the United Kingdom for a state dinner with the royal family. Reynolds was selected as part of the advanced security team, tasked with coordinating protection protocols with British authorities. At 42, Reynolds was considered one of the Bureau's most reliable agents. His colleagues respected his calm demeanor and quick thinking. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with graying temples and sharp blue eyes, he had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His record was spotless, his judgment trusted by superiors who had watched him navigate complex international situations with diplomatic grace. The briefing took place in a windowless room deep within the J. Edgar Hoover building. Special Agent in Charge Patricia Hawthorne, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach and encyclopedic knowledge of protocol, laid out the mission parameters. The President would spend 2 days in London, attending formal ceremonies, bilateral meetings, and the state dinner at Buckingham Palace. "This isn't your typical protection detail," Hawthorne explained, her voice carrying the weight of decades in federal law enforcement. "You'll be working alongside the Metropolitan Police, MI5, and the Royal Protection Squad. Everyone has their own procedures, their own chain of command, and their own way of doing things. Your job is to ensure our protocols integrate seamlessly with theirs while maintaining the highest level of security for our principal." Reynolds nodded, studying the thick briefing materials that outlined centuries-old traditions and modern security measures. The Royal Protection Squad, he learned, was among the most elite law enforcement units in the world. These officers were handpicked from the Metropolitan Police, trained to a level that rivaled Special Forces units, and bound by traditions that stretched back generations. The advance team would arrive in London 3 days before the President. Reynolds would be working directly with Inspector James Whitmore of the Royal Protection Squad, a 20-year veteran who had protected members of the royal family through some of the most challenging periods in recent British history. The coordination between American and British security services had to be flawless. Reynolds spent the next week immersing himself in British protocol. He studied the layout of Buckingham Palace, memorized the faces and backgrounds of every person who would be within 100 yards of the President, and rehearsed scenarios that ranged from medical emergencies to terrorist attacks. The attention to detail was staggering. Every door, every corridor, every moment of the visit had been planned and rehearsed. The flight to London was uneventful. Reynolds traveled with a team of 12 federal agents, each with specific responsibilities for different aspects of the visit. The team included communications specialists, medical personnel, and tactical experts. As senior agent, Reynolds would be the primary liaison with British authorities, responsible for ensuring that American security requirements were met without creating diplomatic friction. Landing at Heathrow Airport, the team was met by Inspector Whitmore and a contingent of British officers. Whitmore was exactly what Reynolds had expected based on his file photo and reputation. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of bearing that spoke of military training and years of high-pressure responsibility. His handshake was firm, his manner professional but not warm. "Agent Reynolds," Whitmore said in a crisp accent that carried hints of his Yorkshire background. "Welcome to London. I trust your flight was comfortable." "Thank you, Inspector. We're grateful for the cooperation and looking forward to working with your team." The British officer's smile was polite but measured. Reynolds sensed immediately that this would be a working relationship built on mutual respect rather than friendship. Both men understood the stakes and the delicate balance required when two elite protection units operated in the same space. The motorcade to central London moved through streets that had been cleared and secured hours earlier. Reynolds watched through bulletproof glass as the city passed by, noting the positioning of British security personnel at key intersections and the subtle but visible presence of armed officers. The coordination was impressive, a testament to months of planning between the two governments. At the hotel where the American team would be staying, Reynolds was briefed on the final security arrangements. The president would arrive in 2 days. Tomorrow would be spent conducting final walkthroughs, testing communications systems, and rehearsing emergency procedures. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for. That evening, Reynolds found himself in his hotel room, reviewing files and trying to push down a nagging sense of unease. He had done this dozens of times before, but something about this assignment felt different. Perhaps it was the weight of protecting the president in a foreign country, or the complex dynamics of working with the British security services. Whatever it was, Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would test him in ways he hadn't experienced before. The Royal Protection Squad had a reputation for excellence that bordered on legend. These officers protected people who were considered living symbols of British history and tradition. They operated under rules and protocols that had evolved over centuries, balancing public access with absolute security. Reynolds respected their expertise, but he also knew that his own training and experience brought unique value to the protection equation. The next morning began with a security briefing at New Scotland Yard. The conference room was filled with representatives from every agency involved in the president's protection. MI5 officers sat alongside Metropolitan Police commanders, while Royal Protection Squad inspectors reviewed final arrangements with American Secret Service agents and FBI personnel. Inspector Whitmore presented the timeline for the state dinner at Buckingham Palace. The president would arrive at 6 in the evening, proceed through a specific route within the palace, and attend the dinner in the grand ballroom. After dinner, there would be a reception in the blue drawing room before the president's departure at 11. The Queen will personally greet the president in the grand entrance, Whitmore explained, pointing to detailed floor plans displayed on large screens around the room. Her Majesty will be accompanied by senior members of the royal family and protected by our close protection officers. The American detail will maintain positions that provide coverage without interfering with royal protocol. Reynolds studied the plans carefully. The grand entrance was a massive space with multiple access points and dozens of people who would need to be monitored simultaneously. His experience told him that crowd control and positioning would be critical, but he also recognized that royal protocol would dictate much of how the evening unfolded. What about emergency evacuation procedures? Reynolds asked. We have 3 primary routes and 2 secondary options, Whitmore replied. Each route has been tested and timed under various scenarios. Your team will be briefed on all procedures, but I must emphasize that any emergency response must coordinate with our command structure. The emphasis on coordination was clear, and Reynolds understood the underlying message. This was British territory, protecting British principles, under British authority. The American team was there as guests, albeit highly trained and experienced guests. The afternoon was spent walking through Buckingham Palace, an experience that struck Reynolds as surreal. The building was a working palace, filled with priceless art and furniture, but also a highly secure facility with modern surveillance and protection systems seamlessly integrated into its historic architecture. The Royal Protection Squad officers who led the walk-through moved through the palace with the kind of familiarity that came from years of service. They knew every room, every passage, every potential hiding spot or security vulnerability. Their knowledge was encyclopedic, their dedication absolute. Reynolds found himself impressed by their professionalism and attention to detail. These officers understood that they were protecting more than individuals, they were safeguarding institutions that represented centuries of British history and tradition. The weight of that responsibility was evident in everything they did. As the day ended, Reynolds returned to his hotel with mixed feelings. The British security arrangements were impressive, perhaps the most thorough he had ever encountered. The level of planning and coordination was exceptional. But he also sensed an underlying tension, a subtle but persistent reminder that he and his team were outsiders in a system that had operated successfully for decades without American involvement. That tension would soon prove more significant than anyone imagined. Reynolds went to bed that night confident in his preparation but, unaware that the next evening would test every assumption he had made about international cooperation, diplomatic protocol, and the split-second decisions that can define a career. Tomorrow, the president would arrive. Tomorrow, two of the world's most elite protection services would work together under the most scrutinized conditions possible. And, tomorrow, Agent Marcus Reynolds would face a moment that would change how he understood the delicate balance between security and diplomacy, between duty and discretion, between two nations that shared common goals but very different approaches to achieving them. The morning of the president's arrival dawned gray and drizzling, typical London weather that added an extra layer of complexity to an already challenging security situation. Agent Reynolds was awake before 5, reviewing final preparations and conducting last-minute equipment checks. Every communication device had been tested, every position confirmed, every contingency reviewed one more time. The American advance team gathered in the hotel's secure conference room for their final briefing. Reynolds looked around the table at men and women he had worked with for years, each bringing specialized skills and unwavering dedication to their shared mission. Agent Sarah Chen handled communications and electronic surveillance, her technical expertise rivaling that of any government agency. Agent David Martinez managed close protection tactics, his background in military special operations evident in his quiet intensity and strategic thinking. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reynolds began, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of leading high-stakes operations, "today we protect the President of the United States on foreign soil. We do this in partnership with British authorities who have graciously opened their doors and shared their expertise. Our job is to integrate seamlessly with their operations while maintaining our own standards and protocols." The team reviewed their assignments one final time. Each agent knew their position, their responsibilities, and their backup protocols. The president would land at Heathrow at 2 in the afternoon, proceed to the American ambassador's residence for a brief rest, then travel to Buckingham Palace for the state dinner at 6. At the palace, Inspector Whitmore was conducting his own final briefing with the Royal Protection Squad. The officers assembled in a room that had served similar purposes for decades, where previous generations of protection officers had prepared to safeguard monarchs, prime ministers, and visiting dignitaries from around the world. "Gentlemen," Whitmore said, his tone reflecting the gravity of the occasion, "tonight we protect Her Majesty while hosting the President of the United States. This is diplomacy at the highest level, requiring security at the highest level. Every movement must be precise, every response coordinated. We have trained for this, and we are ready." Sergeant William Thornton, a 15-year veteran of the Royal Protection Squad, reviewed the positioning for the close protection team that would be directly responsible for the Queen's safety during the evening's events. Thornton was known throughout the service for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to anticipate potential problems before they developed. The Queen herself was preparing for the evening with her typical attention to protocol and tradition. At 97, she had hosted dozens of American presidents and understood better than anyone the delicate balance between ceremonial requirements and security necessities. Her private secretary had coordinated with both British and American security services to ensure that the evening would proceed smoothly while maintaining appropriate dignity and formality. At Heathrow Airport, the presidential aircraft touched down precisely on schedule. The massive Boeing 747, known as Air Force One when carrying the president, taxied to a secure area of the airport where British and American security personnel had established a protective perimeter. Reynolds watched from his position in the motorcade as the president emerged from the aircraft and was greeted by the British Foreign Secretary and the American ambassador. The motorcade to central London moved through streets that had been cleared of traffic and lined with British police officers. Reynolds rode in the lead security vehicle, maintaining constant communication with both American and British command posts. The route had been selected for its security advantages, avoiding potential bottlenecks and providing multiple options for emergency response. At the ambassador's residence, the president met privately with senior American embassy staff and received final briefings on the evening's schedule. Reynolds coordinated with embassy security to ensure that the building's protection remained absolute while preparations continued for the evening's movement to Buckingham Palace. The transition from the ambassador's residence to Buckingham Palace was executed with military precision. The motorcade included armored vehicles carrying the president, support staff, medical personnel, and security teams. British motorcycle officers cleared intersections while American agents monitored communications and watched for any signs of unusual activity. As the motorcade approached Buckingham Palace, Reynolds felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied high-stakes operations. Every sense was heightened, every detail potentially significant. The palace grounds had been secured for hours, but the movement of the presidential party from vehicles to the building represented a moment of vulnerability that required absolute vigilance. The grand entrance of Buckingham Palace was a scene of controlled magnificence. Red carpet stretched from the main doors to the position where the presidential motorcade would stop. British household guards in ceremonial dress stood at attention alongside plainclothes protection officers whose presence was subtle but unmistakable. Inspector Whitmore positioned himself near the entrance, his experienced eyes scanning the assembled crowd of officials, dignitaries, and staff members who would witness the president's arrival. Every person present had been thoroughly vetted, but Whitmore's training had taught him that vigilance never relaxed, regardless of how secure a situation appeared. The Queen emerged from the palace accompanied by senior members of the royal family. At her age, she moved with careful dignity, but her bearing remained regal and commanding. Sergeant Thornton positioned himself at her right shoulder, his eyes constantly moving as he assessed potential threats and monitored the positions of other protection officers. The presidential limousine arrived exactly on schedule. Agent Martinez stepped out first, his eyes sweeping the scene before nodding to Reynolds. The president emerged from the vehicle, and, for a moment, centuries of American and British history converged in the form of two leaders representing their nation's highest traditions and values. The formal greetings proceeded according to carefully rehearsed protocol. The Queen welcomed the president with words that had been crafted by diplomats and reviewed by both governments. British and American flags flew side by side, while photographers captured images that would appear in newspapers around the world. Reynolds maintained his position near the palace entrance, coordinating with Inspector Whitmore to ensure that both protection teams functioned as a unified force. The cooperation was excellent, but Reynolds noted subtle differences in approach and priority that reflected the different training and cultural backgrounds of the two services. Inside the palace, the president was escorted through corridors lined with portraits of British monarchs and decorated with artifacts representing centuries of royal history. The American security detail maintained protective positions while respecting the dignity and formality of their surroundings. The reception before dinner took place in the White Drawing Room, a space that epitomized royal elegance and tradition. Crystal chandeliers illuminated walls covered in silk fabric and adorned with masterpiece paintings. British and American officials mingled in an atmosphere that combined diplomatic necessity with genuine warmth and mutual respect. Reynolds watched from his position near the room's main entrance as the president engaged in conversations with British cabinet ministers, members of parliament, and senior royal family members. Every interaction was monitored, every movement tracked by protection officers who had learned to provide security while remaining virtually invisible. The Queen moved through the reception with remarkable grace for someone of her age. She spoke with the president about shared interests and mutual concerns, demonstrating the diplomatic skill that had made her one of the most respected figures in international relations. Her protection officers, led by Sergeant Thornton, maintained discreet but constant surveillance. As the time approached for dinner, both American and British security teams prepared for the movement to the Grand Ballroom. This transition would involve the largest number of people in the most formal setting of the evening, requiring coordination between multiple protection units and strict adherence to royal protocol. Agent Chen reported from her position monitoring communications that all systems were functioning normally. Electronic surveillance showed no unusual activity either inside or outside the palace grounds. The evening was proceeding exactly as planned, with no indication of problems or security concerns. But, Reynolds had learned during his years in federal law enforcement that the most dangerous moments often came when everything appeared to be proceeding smoothly. Complacency was the enemy of effective protection, and the appearance of normalcy could mask developing threats that might not become apparent until it was too late to respond effectively. Inspector Whitmore was thinking similar thoughts as he monitored the movement toward dinner. His experience had taught him that successful protection required constant vigilance, regardless of how routine a situation might appear. The evening's events were unfolding perfectly, but Whitmore knew that perfection in security work was often an illusion that could be shattered by unexpected developments. The dinner itself would take place in the Grand Ballroom, a space so magnificent that it seemed designed to overwhelm visitors with its grandeur. Gold leaf-covered ornate ceiling decorations while massive crystal chandeliers provided lighting that had illuminated royal dinners for generations. The table was set with china, crystal, and silverware that represented the finest examples of British craftsmanship. As the guests moved toward dinner, Reynolds positioned himself according to the carefully planned security arrangement. He would maintain oversight of the American protection detail while coordinating with British officers to ensure comprehensive coverage of the ballroom and adjacent areas. The positioning had been rehearsed multiple times, but Reynolds knew that real operations always contained variables that couldn't be anticipated in training. Sergeant Thornton escorted the Queen to her position at the head of the table, his movements practiced and precise. The Queen would sit directly across from the President, a seating arrangement that symbolized the relationship between the two nations while creating specific security challenges that both protection teams had prepared to address. The dinner proceeded with the kind of formal elegance that characterized state occasions. Multiple courses were served by palace staff who had been trained not just in service but in the security protocols necessary for such events. Every person entering or leaving the ballroom was monitored, every movement tracked by protection officers positioned throughout the space. Reynolds found himself impressed by the seamless coordination between British and American security personnel. The two teams functioned as a unified force, sharing information and responding to developing situations with the kind of professionalism that reflected months of planning and years of experience. But, beneath the surface success, Reynolds sensed subtle tensions that he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was the natural stress of protecting two world leaders simultaneously, or the pressure of operating in an environment where tradition and security requirements sometimes created competing priorities. Whatever it was, Reynolds felt a growing unease that he attributed to the heightened awareness that came with high-stakes operations. The dinner conversation flowed between topics of mutual interest to both leaders and their guests. Trade relationships, security cooperation, cultural exchanges, and shared challenges occupied much of the discussion. The Queen demonstrated her remarkable knowledge of American history and politics, while the President showed genuine appreciation for British traditions and achievements. As dessert was served, Reynolds checked his watch and noted that the evening was running slightly ahead of schedule. In 30 minutes, the dinner would conclude, and the guests would move to the blue drawing room for a reception that would last approximately 1 hour before the President's departure. The blue drawing room reception would present different security challenges. The space was smaller than the ballroom, but it would accommodate more movement as guests mingled and engaged in informal conversations. Both protection teams had adjusted their positioning and procedures to account for these differences. Reynolds had no way of knowing that events were already in motion that would test every assumption he had made about the evening's security arrangements. A simple misunderstanding, compounded by communication difficulties and cultural differences, was about to create a crisis that would challenge the diplomatic and security relationship between two allied nations. The stage was set for a confrontation that would happen in seconds but be remembered for years. Agent Marcus Reynolds, Inspector James Whitmore, and Sergeant William Thornton were about to face a situation that would require them to balance competing loyalties, conflicting protocols, and split-second decisions that could have international implications. The transition from dinner to the reception in the blue drawing room began exactly as rehearsed. Guests moved through the palace corridors with practiced elegance while protection officers maintained their positions according to carefully coordinated plans. The Queen walked slowly but steadily, her age requiring measured steps but her bearing remaining absolutely regal. Agent Reynolds positioned himself near the entrance to the blue drawing room, maintaining visual contact with the President while coordinating with British officers through his earpiece. The communications system allowed real-time coordination between American and British protection teams, ensuring that every movement was tracked and every potential concern addressed immediately. Sergeant Thornton walked beside the Queen, his attention focused equally on her immediate protection and the broader security environment. At 38, Thornton represented the new generation of Royal Protection Squad officers, combining traditional training with modern tactical skills and advanced technology. His dedication to the Queen's safety was absolute, honed by years of service and reinforced by intensive training that prepared him for any conceivable threat. The blue drawing room represented one of Buckingham Palace's most intimate formal spaces. Decorated in shades of blue and gold, with furniture and artwork that reflected centuries of royal taste and tradition, the room provided an elegant setting for the kind of informal conversations that often proved more significant than formal diplomatic meetings. Inspector Whitmore coordinated the positioning of British protection officers throughout the room and adjacent corridors. His experience had taught him that reception-style events required different security approaches than formal dinners. People moved more freely, conversations formed and dissolved organically, and the protection challenge shifted from static positions to dynamic coverage. The President entered the room accompanied by key members of his delegation, including the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, and senior White House staff. Agent Martinez maintained close proximity while other American agents positioned themselves according to predetermined assignments that balanced protection requirements with diplomatic protocol. British cabinet ministers, senior civil servants, and members of Parliament gradually filled the room, creating the kind of gathering that epitomized high-level international diplomacy. Every person present had been thoroughly vetted through security processes that examined backgrounds, associations, and potential risks with meticulous attention to detail. The Queen took her position near the room's ornate fireplace, flanked by senior members of the royal family who had been selected for their diplomatic experience and their ability to engage effectively with international visitors. Her private secretary stood nearby, ready to facilitate introductions and ensure that conversations flowed smoothly throughout the evening. Reynolds monitored the room's dynamics while maintaining constant communication with his team. Agent Chen reported normal activity from her electronic surveillance position, while other agents confirmed that all access points remained secure and all protocols were being followed correctly. The first indication that something unusual was developing came through Sergeant Thornton's earpiece. A palace security monitor had detected what appeared to be unauthorized movement in a service corridor that connected to the blue drawing room. The report was brief and preliminary, but it triggered immediate attention from British protection officers. Inspector Whitmore responded to the alert by dispatching 2 officers to investigate while maintaining normal operations in the reception room. This kind of precautionary response was standard procedure, designed to address potential concerns before they could develop into actual security threats. Meanwhile, Agent Reynolds noticed a subtle change in the behavior of British protection officers. Their positions remained the same, but their alertness level had increased in ways that only experienced security personnel would recognize. Years of working protective details had taught Reynolds to read these subtle signals and respond accordingly. The investigation of the service corridor revealed a maintenance worker who had apparently become confused about scheduling and entered a restricted area without proper authorization. The individual was quickly identified, verified through security databases, and escorted from the area by palace security personnel. However, the incident created a brief communication gap as British officers focused on resolving the situation. During these crucial few minutes, normal coordination protocols experienced a temporary disruption that would prove significant in the events that followed. President Johnson moved through the reception, engaging in conversations that combined personal warmth with diplomatic substance. His discussion with the Foreign Secretary about trade relationships led to an animated exchange about mutual economic interests that captured the attention of other guests and created a natural gathering point near the center of the room. The Queen, observing the developing conversation, decided to join the discussion. This movement was entirely appropriate and consistent with her role as host, but it represented a change from the planned positioning that required immediate adjustment by her protection detail. Sergeant Thornton moved with the Queen, maintaining his protective position while coordinating with other Royal Protection Squad officers through subtle hand signals and brief radio communications. The movement was executed smoothly, but it created a momentary shift in the room's security configuration that required adaptation by both British and American protection teams. At this critical moment, a second incident developed that would prove far more significant than the first. A senior American diplomat, attempting to retrieve a briefing document from his jacket pocket, made a sudden movement that was misinterpreted by a newly assigned Royal Protection Squad officer who had not been fully briefed on all American personnel. The British officer, Constable James McCarthy, was serving his first assignment with the Royal Protection Squad after transferring from counterterrorism duties with the Metropolitan Police. His training emphasized immediate response to potential threats, and his lack of familiarity with American protection protocols led him to interpret the diplomat's movement as potentially threatening. McCarthy stepped forward and firmly grasped the American diplomat's arm, demanding that he identify himself and explain his actions. The diplomat, startled by the unexpected intervention, reacted with confusion and attempted to pull away while explaining that he was simply retrieving a document. This interaction immediately drew the attention of Agent Reynolds, who was positioned approximately 15 feet away. Reynolds observed a British officer physically restraining an American official without apparent justification, creating a situation that required immediate intervention to prevent escalation. Reynolds moved quickly toward the developing confrontation, his training and experience guiding his response. His first priority was de-escalation, but he was also responsible for protecting American personnel from what appeared to be unjustified detention by foreign security forces. "Officer, I'm Agent Reynolds, FBI," Reynolds announced as he approached, his voice calm but authoritative. "This gentleman is a member of the American diplomatic delegation. Perhaps we can resolve this quickly and quietly." Constable McCarthy, already stressed by his uncertainty about the situation and his awareness that he was operating in the presence of two world leaders, interpreted Reynolds' approach as a potential threat to his ability to complete what he believed was a necessary security action. "Sir, step back please," McCarthy responded, his London accent thick with tension. This individual made a suspicious movement and must be properly identified before proceeding. The exchange was conducted in low voices, but the body language was clear to experienced protection officers throughout the room. Sergeant Thornton noticed the developing situation and began moving in that direction while maintaining his primary responsibility for the Queen's immediate protection. Inspector Whitmore was monitoring multiple radio channels when he became aware of the confrontation. His first instinct was to defuse the situation through direct intervention, but he was positioned on the opposite side of the room and would need several seconds to reach the scene. Reynolds faced a decision that thousands of hours of training had prepared him for, but which no amount of training could make simple. A foreign law enforcement officer was physically restraining an American official without apparent justification. The incident was occurring in the presence of the President of the United States and the Queen of England, creating diplomatic implications that extended far beyond the immediate security concern. "Officer McCarthy," Reynolds said, having quickly identified the British constable through his earpiece connection to FBI intelligence resources, "I understand your caution, but this gentleman is Dr. James Peterson, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. He's been fully vetted and cleared for this event." McCarthy's training had emphasized that protection of the royal family took precedence over all other considerations, including diplomatic sensitivities. His interpretation of the situation was that an unidentified individual had made a suspicious movement in the immediate vicinity of the Queen, and that his responsibility was to neutralize any potential threat regardless of claims about diplomatic status. "Sir, I need to see proper identification and understand what was being retrieved," McCarthy insisted, maintaining his grip on Dr. Peterson's arm. Dr. Peterson, a career diplomat with extensive international experience, understood the delicate nature of the situation but was also growing frustrated with what he perceived as unreasonable treatment. His attempt to comply with the British officer's demands by reaching again for his identification created additional tension as McCarthy interpreted this movement as potentially non-compliant. Reynolds assessed the situation and realized that standard de-escalation procedures were not working. McCarthy appeared committed to his course of action, Dr. Peterson was becoming increasingly agitated, and the incident was beginning to draw attention from other guests in the room. More critically, Reynolds noticed that the confrontation was positioning itself between the American protection detail and the President, creating a potential security vulnerability that violated fundamental protective principles. If an actual threat emerged, the incident could compromise the team's ability to respond effectively. The decision that Reynolds made in the next 3 seconds would be analyzed, debated, and remembered for years to come. Every option carried risks. Allowing the situation to continue could compromise American security and dignity. Escalating the confrontation could create an international incident with one of America's closest allies. Reynolds reached for his service weapon. The movement was smooth and practiced, honed by years of training and hundreds of hours on shooting ranges. His hand moved to the Glock 22.40 caliber pistol holstered on his right hip, his fingers finding the familiar grip with unconscious precision. But Reynolds did not draw the weapon. Instead, he placed his hand on the grip in a position that was clearly visible to McCarthy and other British officers, a gesture that conveyed readiness without escalation. "Constable," Reynolds said, his voice remaining calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority, "I need you to release Dr. Peterson immediately. This situation requires immediate de-escalation." The sight of an American federal agent with his hand on his weapon while addressing a British protection officer created a moment of absolute silence in the immediate area. Sergeant Thornton saw the gesture and immediately understood its significance. Inspector Whitmore received urgent reports through his earpiece and began moving quickly toward the scene. McCarthy faced his own critical decision. His training told him that any threat to the royal family must be neutralized regardless of consequences. But his experience also told him that drawing weapons in the presence of the Queen and the President of the United States would create consequences beyond his ability to manage. The confrontation lasted approximately 15 seconds, but those seconds contained decisions and implications that would resonate for months afterward. Two highly trained protection officers, each committed to their duty and their principles, faced each other across a cultural and procedural divide that suddenly seemed unbridgeable. He understood immediately that both officers were acting according to their training and their understanding of their duties, but that the confrontation threatened to spiral beyond anyone's control. "Constable McCarthy," Thornton said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of rank and experience, "stand down, please." McCarthy looked at his superior with confusion and frustration evident in his expression. Everything in his training told him that he was responding appropriately to a potential threat in the immediate vicinity of the Queen. The arrival of additional personnel, including an armed American agent, only reinforced his belief that the situation required his continued vigilance. "Sergeant, this individual made a suspicious movement and has not been properly identified," McCarthy reported, maintaining his grip on Dr. Peterson while keeping his eyes fixed on Reynolds. Inspector Whitmore arrived seconds later, having moved through the crowd with the kind of practiced efficiency that avoided drawing attention while covering ground quickly. His assessment of the situation was immediate and sobering. Two elite protection services were on the verge of a confrontation that could damage the alliance between their nations and compromise the security of both principles they were sworn to protect. "Agent Reynolds," Whitmore said, approaching with his hands visible and his manner carefully controlled, "I believe we have a misunderstanding that can be resolved quickly." Reynolds maintained his position with his hand on his weapon, but his expression showed no hostility toward the British officers. His training and experience told him that de-escalation required strength combined with restraint, and that showing weakness at this moment could encourage further challenges to American authority. "Inspector, I need Dr. Peterson released immediately," Reynolds responded. "He's a senior American diplomat who has been fully vetted and cleared for this event. The continued detention is inappropriate and potentially compromises our security configuration." The exchange was conducted in low voices, but the body language was clear to anyone with security training. President Johnson, engaged in conversation with the Foreign Secretary approximately 20 feet away, was unaware of the developing crisis. The Queen, speaking with senior members of Parliament near the fireplace, likewise continued her hosting duties without apparent knowledge of the confrontation. Agent Martinez, monitoring the situation from his position near the President, had observed the initial stages of the incident and was prepared to intervene if necessary. His tactical training emphasized rapid response to any threat to the principal, but he also understood that premature action could escalate a manageable situation into a crisis. Dr. Peterson, caught in the middle of a confrontation he had not anticipated and did not fully understand, attempted to defuse the situation through diplomatic means. "Gentlemen, perhaps I can simply provide identification and we can resolve this misunderstanding," he suggested, his voice reflecting years of experience in managing international tensions. But McCarthy's interpretation of the situation had evolved beyond simple identification verification. The presence of an armed American agent with his hand on his weapon suggested to the British constable that he had uncovered a more serious security concern than initially apparent. "Sir, I need everyone to step back while I sort this out," McCarthy announced, his voice rising slightly as stress affected his judgment and his adherence to protocol. It was at this critical moment that an entirely unexpected intervention occurred. The Queen herself, whose attention had been drawn by the subtle changes in her protection officer's behavior, approached the group with the kind of quiet authority that had defined her 70 years of public service. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite her advanced age, "is there perhaps something I can help you resolve?" The appearance of the Queen transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Every person involved suddenly faced the reality that their actions were being observed by one of the most respected figures in international relations, someone whose judgment and opinion carried weight far beyond her official constitutional role. Sergeant Thornton immediately stepped forward, his protective instincts requiring him to position himself between the Queen and any potential source of trouble. But his movement was careful and measured, designed to show respect for her decision to involve herself while maintaining appropriate security coverage. "Your Majesty," Thornton said respectfully, "we have a minor security matter that we are resolving." The Queen's eyes, still sharp and intelligent despite her age, assessed the situation with the kind of practiced judgment that had guided her through decades of complex diplomatic challenges. She could see that this was not a minor matter, but rather a confrontation between Allied security services that threatened to create lasting damage if not handled properly. "Agent Reynolds," she said, addressing him directly with the kind of precise knowledge of personnel that had always impressed visiting dignitaries, "I understand you serve with distinction in your FBI. Inspector Whitmore speaks highly of the cooperation between our services." Reynolds found himself in a situation that no amount of training had prepared him for. He was being addressed directly by the Queen of England while his hand remained on his service weapon in response to what he perceived as inappropriate treatment of an American official by her protection officers. "Your Majesty, thank you," Reynolds replied, his voice reflecting genuine respect despite the tension of the moment. "We are grateful for the cooperation and hospitality, but I have concerns about the treatment of Dr. Peterson." The Queen turned her attention to Constable McCarthy, whose face had gone pale as he realized that his actions were being observed and evaluated by the person he had sworn to protect. The weight of her attention was almost overwhelming, but her expression was not angry or disappointed, merely curious. "Constable, what exactly do you believe has occurred here?" she asked, her tone encouraging honesty rather than defensiveness. McCarthy struggled to explain his actions in terms that would sound reasonable under the Queen's direct scrutiny. "Your Majesty, this gentleman made a sudden movement that appeared suspicious, and, when questioned, he could not immediately provide proper identification." Dr. Peterson, seizing the opportunity to clarify the situation, spoke directly to the Queen. "Your Majesty, I was attempting to retrieve a briefing document from my jacket pocket. I apologize if my movement appeared suspicious. The Queen considered this information with the kind of careful thought that had characterized her approach to complex problems throughout her reign. She understood that this incident represented more than a simple misunderstanding. It reflected the challenges inherent in coordinating security between different nations with different protocols and different cultural approaches to law enforcement. "Inspector Whitmore," she said, turning to the senior British officer, "what would be your recommendation for resolving this situation?" Whitmore faced a decision that would define his career and, potentially affect British-American security cooperation for years to come. He could support his constable's actions and risk creating a diplomatic incident, or he could acknowledge errors in judgment that might undermine the authority of the Royal Protection Squad. "Your Majesty," Whitmore replied after a moment of careful consideration, "I believe Constable McCarthy was acting in accordance with his training, but that the situation requires immediate clarification and resolution. Dr. Peterson's credentials are well established, and continued detention would be inappropriate." The Queen nodded thoughtfully, then addressed the group as a whole. "Gentlemen, you are all serving with distinction in protecting those who have been entrusted to your care. Sometimes that service requires us to balance competing concerns and find solutions that honor everyone's commitment to duty." She paused, allowing her words to be absorbed by everyone present, then continued with the kind of wisdom that had made her one of the most respected figures in modern diplomacy. "Constable McCarthy, your vigilance in protecting our guests is commendable, but Dr. Peterson has been properly vetted and cleared. Please release him with our thanks for his patience with our security procedures." McCarthy immediately complied, stepping back and releasing Dr. Peterson with a brief nod of acknowledgement. The young constable's face reflected his understanding that he had made errors in judgment, but also his relief that the situation was being resolved without disciplinary consequences. "Agent Reynolds," the Queen continued, "your protection of American personnel and your concern for Dr. Peterson reflects the highest standards of your service. I trust that our continued cooperation will benefit from the professionalism you have demonstrated this evening." Reynolds slowly moved his hand away from his weapon, the gesture visible to everyone present and clearly signaling the de-escalation of the confrontation. His expression reflected both relief at the resolution and profound respect for the Queen's intervention. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Reynolds replied. "Dr. Peterson and I are grateful for your understanding and for the professionalism of your protection officers." Inspector Whitmore seized the moment to reinforce the resolution and prevent any possibility of renewed tension. "Agent Reynolds, perhaps we might coordinate more closely for the remainder of the evening to ensure that any similar misunderstandings are avoided." "Absolutely, Inspector," Reynolds agreed. "Our teams work best when communication is clear and continuous." The Queen smiled with the kind of satisfaction that comes from resolving complex problems through wisdom rather than authority. She had observed the incident develop, recognized its potential for serious consequences, and intervened in a manner that preserved everyone's dignity while ensuring that the evening could continue successfully. "Excellent," she said. "Now, shall we rejoin our other guests? I believe the President was asking about our collection of American historical artifacts." As the group dispersed, returning to their assigned positions and resuming normal protection protocols, the incident's resolution became clear to everyone involved. What could have been a crisis that damaged international relationships had instead become a demonstration of how experienced professionals could overcome misunderstandings through mutual respect and clear communication. Dr. Peterson returned to his conversations with British officials, his experience enriched by an unexpected lesson in international security cooperation. Constable McCarthy resumed his duties with a deeper understanding of the complexities involved in protecting foreign dignitaries and the importance of coordination between different protection services. Agent Reynolds and Inspector Whitmore found themselves working together more effectively than before the incident, their mutual respect enhanced by their shared experience of managing a potentially dangerous situation. The remainder of the evening proceeded without incident, marked by the kind of seamless cooperation that characterized successful international security operations. But, the most significant impact of the evening's events would become apparent in the weeks and months that followed, as the lessons learned from those crucial 15 seconds influenced training protocols, coordination procedures, and the relationship between two of the world's most elite protection services. The state dinner concluded at 11:15, exactly as scheduled. President Johnson departed Buckingham Palace with the same ceremonial dignity that had marked his arrival, but the American security team carried with them an experience that would influence their approach to international cooperation for years to come. As the presidential motorcade moved through London's quiet streets toward the airport, Agent Reynolds reflected on an evening that had tested every assumption he had made about diplomatic security. The immediate aftermath of the incident was handled with the kind of professional discretion that characterized both the FBI and the Royal Protection Squad. No official reports mentioned the confrontation, and no diplomatic cables referenced the brief crisis that had developed in the Blue Drawing Room. The evening was recorded in official records as a complete success, which in many ways it had been. But, within the security services of both nations, the incident became a case study in the challenges and opportunities of international cooperation. The successful resolution was analyzed, documented, and incorporated into training programs that would prepare future officers for similar situations. Agent Reynolds returned to Washington 3 days later, carrying with him a deeper understanding of how cultural differences could create security challenges even among the closest allies. His debriefing with FBI leadership focused not on the confrontation itself, but on the lessons learned and the improvements that could be made to coordination protocols. Marcus, special agent in charge Patricia Hawthorne said during their private meeting, "Your handling of the situation demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment we need in international operations. You protected American personnel while respecting British authority, and you found a way to de-escalate without compromising security." Reynolds had been prepared for criticism, even disciplinary action, for placing his hand on his weapon while in the presence of Allied protection officers. Instead, he found that his superiors viewed his actions as textbook responses to a challenging situation that required both strength and restraint. "The key lesson," Reynolds replied, "is that our training needs to include more emphasis on cultural awareness and communication protocols." The British officers were acting professionally according to their understanding of their duties, but our systems didn't provide adequate coordination. This observation led to immediate changes in FBI international protection training. New modules were developed that focused specifically on working with Allied security services, emphasizing communication protocols, cultural sensitivities, and the importance of understanding different approaches to threat assessment and response. Meanwhile, in London, the Royal Protection Squad was conducting its own analysis of the evening's events. Inspector Whitmore led a comprehensive review that examined every aspect of the incident, from the initial misunderstanding to the Queen's intervention to the successful resolution. Constable McCarthy found himself not facing disciplinary action, but rather participating in an intensive training program designed to prepare Royal Protection Squad officers for the complexities of international security cooperation. His experience became a teaching tool that helped other officers understand the challenges of protecting foreign dignitaries while maintaining appropriate coordination with visiting security teams. James, Whitmore told McCarthy during one of their training sessions, "Your instincts about potential threats were correct, but your understanding of coordination protocols needs development. Protecting the royal family in today's world requires us to work effectively with security services from around the globe." The incident led to significant changes in Royal Protection Squad training and procedures. New protocols were established for communicating with foreign protection teams, and enhanced briefing procedures ensured that all officers understood the backgrounds and credentials of visiting personnel. Most significantly, the Queen's personal intervention became a model for how senior principals could contribute to security solutions rather than simply being passive recipients of protection. Her willingness to engage directly with the situation had transformed a potential crisis into a learning opportunity that strengthened relationships between Allied security services. 6 months after the state dinner, Reynolds found himself back in London, leading an FBI delegation to a joint training exercise with British security services. The program, developed as a direct result of the Blue Drawing Room incident, brought together American and British protection officers for intensive training in coordination protocols and cultural awareness. The exercise took place at a secure facility outside London, where realistic scenarios tested the ability of joint teams to respond to various security challenges. Reynolds worked alongside Inspector Whitmore to design training modules that emphasized communication, mutual respect, and the importance of understanding different operational cultures. Agent Reynolds, Whitmore said during one of their planning sessions, that evening at Buckingham Palace taught all of us valuable lessons about the complexity of modern security work. We're stronger as allies when we understand each other's approaches and find ways to integrate our capabilities. The joint training program became a model for international security cooperation that was adopted by other allied nations. American, British, Canadian, and Australian protection services began regular exchanges that improved coordination and reduced the likelihood of misunderstandings during joint operations. Constable McCarthy, now promoted to sergeant and serving as an instructor in the joint training program, often used his own experience as a teaching example. His willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and learn from them made him an effective educator who helped other officers understand the importance of cultural awareness and communication. The key lesson from that night, McCarthy would tell his students, is that good intentions and professional training are not always enough. We must also understand the people we work with and find ways to coordinate our efforts effectively. Dr. James Peterson, the American diplomat whose attempt to retrieve a document had triggered the incident, became an advocate for enhanced security coordination in diplomatic settings. His experience led to new State Department guidelines for diplomatic personnel attending events where multiple security services were present. The changes implemented as a result of the Buckingham Palace incident had far-reaching effects beyond the immediate relationship between American and British security services. The protocols developed for communication and coordination became standard practice for international protection operations, reducing tensions and improving effectiveness in dozens of subsequent joint operations. Reynolds's career advanced significantly in the years following the London assignment. His demonstrated ability to handle complex international situations led to his selection for increasingly responsible positions, eventually culminating in his appointment as special agent in charge of the FBI's International Operations Division. In that role, Reynolds oversaw the implementation of training programs and coordination protocols that had their origins in those crucial 15 seconds in the blue drawing room. His experience became the foundation for a new approach to international security cooperation that emphasized mutual respect, cultural understanding, and effective communication. The Queen, in her final years of public service, often reflected on that evening as an example of how personal intervention could resolve conflicts that seemed intractable through normal channels. Her decision to address the situation directly demonstrated the continued relevance of personal diplomacy in an age of complex international relationships. Inspector Whitmore retired from the Royal Protection Squad 5 years after the incident, having overseen the implementation of training and coordination protocols that became the standard for British security services. His final report to his superiors emphasized the importance of learning from challenging situations and using those lessons to improve future operations. The measure of a professional protection service, Whitmore wrote, is not whether problems arise, but how effectively we learn from those problems and use the lessons to become better at serving those we are sworn to protect. The Blue Drawing Room at Buckingham Palace continues to host diplomatic receptions and state functions, witnessed by protection officers who have been trained according to protocols that have their origins in that memorable evening. The room itself bears no visible reminder of the incident, but the enhanced coordination between international security services stands as a lasting testament to the power of learning from challenging experiences. Agent Marcus Reynolds, now retired from active service but continuing to work as a consultant on international security matters, often speaks to law enforcement groups about the importance of cultural awareness and effective communication. His standard presentation includes a detailed analysis of the Buckingham Palace incident, emphasizing how a potential crisis became a catalyst for improved cooperation. That evening taught me that the most dangerous assumption in security work is that everyone thinks the way you do, Reynolds tells his audiences. Effective protection requires not just technical skills and tactical training, but also the ability to understand and work with people whose backgrounds and approaches may be very different from your own. The incident that lasted 15 seconds created changes that continue to influence international security cooperation decades later. Training programs, coordination protocols, and communication procedures that were developed as a direct result of that evening have been adopted by security services around the world, improving the safety and effectiveness of diplomatic protection operations. The story of Agent Reynolds and his confrontation with the Royal Protection Squad has become legend within law enforcement circles, but its true significance lies not in the drama of the moment, but in the positive changes that emerged from a challenging situation. It stands as proof that even the most difficult professional conflicts can be transformed into opportunities for growth and improved cooperation when handled with wisdom, respect, and a commitment to learning. In the end, the evening that could have damaged relationships between two allied nations instead strengthened those relationships and created a model for international cooperation that continues to serve the security services of both countries. The legacy of those 15 seconds in the blue drawing room extends far beyond the individuals involved, touching the lives of countless protection officers who benefit from enhanced training and improved coordination protocols. The story serves as a reminder that in the complex world of international security, success is measured not by the absence of challenges, but by the ability to turn those challenges into opportunities for growth, learning, and improved cooperation between the dedicated professionals who serve to protect the leaders and institutions of democratic nations around the world. Picture this: you're standing in one of the most secure places on Earth, surrounded by centuries of tradition and protocol. Every movement is watched, every breath monitored. Then, suddenly, in a split second, two worlds collide: American federal authority meets ancient royal protection. A gun is drawn. Time stops. Hearts race. And what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about power, respect, and the unwritten rules that govern the most protected people on our planet. This isn't fiction. This isn't a movie scene. This is the true story of Agent Marcus Reynolds, a decorated federal officer with 15 years of experience, who found himself in an impossible situation that would test every instinct he'd ever learned. What started as a routine diplomatic mission became a moment that would be whispered about in intelligence circles for years to come. Get ready to witness a confrontation that redefined international security protocols and proved that sometimes, the most powerful moments happen when two immovable forces meet head-on.